Underneath the centuries-old structure of St. Remy's Church, beyond the stone steps that creaked with age and beneath the echo of solemn chants, there was a basement few dared to enter. The air down there was always 10 degrees colder, even in summer, and the smell of damp wood and old incense lingered like a ghost that never left. The light was fluorescent but dim, flickering now and then as if struggling to stay alive in a place that had long forgotten warmth. Cobwebs stretched between the beams like veils, and shelves sagged under the weight of discarded objects. Cracked icons, rusted chalices, candle stubs fused into glass, boxes with labels too faded to read. Lena had only been inside once before, years ago, and she remembered how the silence there felt thick, like something pressing against her skin. She came this time because Father August had asked her to retrieve something simple, an old brass incense holder, nothing more. It should have been near the top of the stairs, among the labeled relics for seasonal use, but the bin was gone, misplaced or buried deeper. With no other task for the day, Lena went farther in, past the labeled relics, past the pews stacked against the wall, past the dust-coated boxes that hadn't been touched in decades. The light barely reached that far. She used her phone flashlight, though it flickered once when she stepped past a wooden support column, and then she saw it. In the farthest corner of the basement, almost beneath a cracked arch in the stone, there was a low crate unlike the others. It wasn't cardboard or plastic. It was solid wood with dark iron hinges, its surface chipped but strangely clean. What drew her in wasn't the crate itself, but the way it seemed untouched, not dusty, not worn, like something had placed it there recently, though nothing about the surroundings suggested movement in years. She approached slowly, kneeling beside it, brushing her hand across the top where a faint symbol had been etched into the wood, crudely and not in any language she recognized. When she opened the lid, the hinges didn't creak. They moved too easily, as if waiting. Inside was just one object, a Bible, oversized, leather-bound with gold filigree that hadn't faded. It lay perfectly centered, too perfectly, and the moment Lena saw it, her stomach tightened. It wasn't the presence of the Bible that struck her, it was the absence of anything else. No cloth wrapping, no sign of age or wear, not even a single scrap of paper. Her breath fogged as if the temperature dropped further, though her phone showed nothing had changed. When she touched the Bible, she felt warmth. Not from the book, but through it, like something alive, something aware, lay dormant beneath the cover. She didn't open it. Not yet. She placed it back into the crate, closed the lid, stood, and walked away. But halfway up the stairs, she stopped. She looked back. She returned, picked it up again, held it tight to her chest like something precious or dangerous, or both, and left the basement without another word. The warmth remained, even in her arms. And the further she walked from that cold basement, the more it pulsed, faintly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Lena kept the Bible hidden for most of the day, tucked beneath the folds of a blanket in the back of her bedroom closet. She told no one about it, not the priest, not the sacristan, not even Mara, her closest friend at the parish. It wasn't guilt that kept her silent, at least not at first, but a sensation she couldn't name. Something about the way the leather had warmed under her fingers. Something about how the edges of the gold-etched cross had shimmered slightly, even in shadow. She tried not to think about it as she cleaned the altar cloths, as she arranged hymnals in neat rows, as she lit votive candles with practiced reverence. But it followed her. A presence. Not loud, just aware. That night the church bells rang in the distance for Compline, though Lena stayed home. Her apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on the ribs. Outside, the wind dragged leaves across the windows in bursts. Inside, she paced. She turned on a lamp, then off again. Finally, near midnight, she returned to the closet and pulled the Bible out. The leather looked darker now, or maybe it was the light. She brought it to her small kitchen table and laid it gently down, as if afraid it might be harmed, or angered. She opened it slowly. The pages were cream-colored and impossibly clean. Not a hint of dust, not even along the edges. The font was classic, the verses familiar at first glance. But by the third page, she realized something was off. A verse in Genesis was phrased, strangely, almost like a whisper interrupting a chant. She turned the page. Another line. Different. Not her memory playing tricks, but a shift in meaning, as if someone had rewritten it with subtle, deliberate intent. She began flipping faster, watching the words with growing unease. Then she found it. A handwritten note wedged between the Old and New Testament. Not new paper. It was yellowed and rough, written in black ink that had bled slightly into the fibers. The script was uneven, hurried. It said only, "If you're reading this, it already knows." Her breath caught. She looked around instinctively, though the apartment was silent. When she glanced back at the book, she noticed something else. Her name. Not in the note, in the margins of the page beneath it. Not typed, not printed, but there, in the same ink. Lena will open what should remain closed. Her pulse kicked hard against her throat. She blinked, leaned closer, touched the letters. They were real. Not imagined, not scribbled in afterward. The ink looked aged. It matched the note. She flipped back to the cover, checked the first pages, then returned. The words were still there. The air felt heavier now. The lamp above her buzzed, faintly. She rubbed her hands together for warmth, but they weren't cold. They were trembling. Something inside her told her to close the book, to put it away, to pretend it had never been found. But her fingers hesitated. She turned one more page. The passage was unfamiliar, a chapter that didn't exist in any edition she had ever read. It spoke, in broken cadence, almost poetic, of a voice that waits behind the veil of printed truth. A voice that enters through knowing. A voice that erases the reader. She slammed the book shut. The sound echoed too loudly in the small room. Her reflection in the darkened window looked back with wide eyes. She carried the Bible to her bedroom, placed it in a drawer, and wrapped it tightly in cloth. But even with it hidden again, she couldn't sleep. Every creak in the building sounded like footsteps. Every shadow on the ceiling looked like fingers reaching. And though the room remained still, her name echoed somewhere, softly, persistently, just beyond the edge of thought. Lena didn't plan to show the Bible to anyone. In fact, she spent the next day convincing herself that what she had seen, her name written in the margins, the strange passage, the ominous note, was all some trick of light or stress or imagination. But denial is fragile, and curiosity more enduring. The book sat silent in her dresser drawer, wrapped tightly in a white sheet. It didn't make a sound. It didn't move. But it was still there, like a closed eye that never stops watching. The second evening, Mara came over for tea. They sat in Lena's living room, a small quiet space made soft by warm lamps and fraying cushions. They spoke of trivial things: the choir's new robes, the weather's sudden change, a child's strange drawing left in the pews. Lena tried to sound normal, but Mara noticed something in her eyes. A distance. A weight. Eventually, Lena stood up, hesitated, then went to her bedroom. She returned with the book, holding it like something she wasn't sure she wanted to pass on. Mara looked at it with curiosity. "It's beautiful," she said. "Where did you find it?" Lena didn't answer. She only placed it gently on the coffee table and nodded for Mara to open it. Mara did. The moment she flipped the cover open, her smile began to fade. She turned a few pages, slower and slower each time. "It's empty," she finally said. "There's nothing written here." Lena frowned, reached forward, took the book back. She opened it again, and the pages were full. Verses, columns, the same dense text she had seen before. The book was normal, or at least it appeared so, but only for her. She turned to the strange chapter. It was still there, the ink unchanged. But now the first line was different. Where it had once spoken, of veiled voices it now read, "What cannot be shared will remain." Lena closed it quickly and tucked it under her arm, brushing off Mara's concern. She blamed the lighting, said it was probably an optical illusion, some trick of old paper. Mara left not long after, unsettled. That night, Lena couldn't help herself. She returned to the book just past midnight. The apartment was silent, but not peaceful. The silence was charged, like the hum of a speaker left on with no sound. She opened the Bible slowly, careful not to disturb the room. She turned to a familiar passage in Psalms, only it wasn't there. Instead, there were blank pages, dozens of them, one after another. Panicked, she flipped back toward Genesis. Blank. She tried the Gospels. Still blank. And then, midway through, Matthew, words began to reappear. One sentence, then another, then full paragraphs. But they were unfamiliar and they weren't biblical. They were phrases, thoughts, some of them hers, memories she had not written or spoken in years. Her first confession at age 13. The silent prayer she said before her mother's funeral. The line she whispered last month while standing alone in the chapel. "I don't know if you're still listening." She pushed the book away. Her breath trembled. The lamp above her flickered once, then returned to full brightness. She stood, trying to collect herself, but her reflection in the window caught her eye. She was looking directly at it, but it seemed to be looking somewhere else. She turned back to the book, now closed again, though she hadn't touched it. Slowly, she opened it once more. A new sentence was written across the center of the title page in that same fading black ink. "If you leave, I will follow." Lena closed the book, this time slower, and placed it back in the drawer, deeper than before, under clothes and boxes and paper. But she knew it would not matter. The words were moving, shifting, escaping. The Bible no longer simply contained stories. It was learning hers, and it didn't want to forget. The next morning brought no peace. Lena hadn't slept. The air in her apartment felt thick, the kind of heaviness that presses on the chest and makes silence seem too loud. She walked through her home like a stranger, afraid to look at corners for too long, unsure if she'd find herself reflected back or something else entirely. The Bible remained tucked away beneath a drawer in her bedroom, but it didn't matter. Its presence had already spread, like ink soaking through paper. She felt it in the light bulbs that flickered at the edge of her vision, in the way her clock ticked unevenly, skipping seconds, in how the shadows on her wall no longer matched the shapes that cast them. Around noon, someone knocked at the door, not the usual friendly rap of a neighbor or delivery. This was slow, even intentional. She hesitated before opening it. On the other side stood a man she recognized from the parish, Father Pavel. Not a regular at her chapel, but a visiting priest she'd seen once or twice, always silent, always watching. His expression was hard to read, but there was urgency in his eyes. Without asking permission, he stepped inside. He didn't sit, he didn't smile. He looked around her apartment with the practiced glance of someone not seeing furniture, but reading traces. His coat was still wet with morning rain. His hands were tucked in his sleeves like they were hiding something. After a moment, he spoke in a low voice that felt too calm for what followed. He told her she wasn't the first. Others had found it before, some in old crypts, some in abandoned monasteries, one even buried beneath a tree. Always a Bible, always unreadable to everyone but the finder, always shifting, always watching. He asked her how long it had been since the words stopped staying, where they belonged. Lena said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence confirmed what he already knew. From his coat, he pulled out 3 things: a small wooden crucifix, a glass vial of holy water, and an iron key. He placed them on her table, without explanation. Then he gestured toward the hallway. She led him to the drawer. When she pulled it open, the air shifted. Colder, drier. The room felt as though something had just inhaled and was holding its breath. Father Pavel took the Bible out carefully, as if it were something venomous. He opened it, just enough to glance inside. Then he froze. His hand tightened. Lena saw his eyes flicker, not with surprise, but with recognition. He read something only he could understand, and what he read frightened him. He closed the book and looked at her, his face pale. He said it must be returned, but not to the church, not to the earth, not even to fire. He said it must be sealed, buried, where no one could dig. He said once it knows a name, it remembers. Once it writes a memory, it becomes part of you. And once it answers you back, it's no longer just a book. Lena asked what it was. He didn't answer. He only looked at the Bible again, then at her, then at the window, where outside the sky had darkened far too quickly for early afternoon. He whispered that he would take care of it if she allowed, but even as he reached for it again, the book shuddered beneath his hand. It wasn't violent. It didn't jump. But it moved, deliberately. And on the table, the crucifix he'd placed minutes before had fallen, face down. They stared at each other in silence. Neither of them touched the book again for a long time. But both of them knew that. Time had already run out. That night, Lena didn't try to sleep. She didn't light any candles, didn't prepare tea, didn't attempt to read or pray or distract herself. She simply sat in her chair facing the table where the Bible still rested. Father Pavel had left in silence hours earlier, his expression tight and unreadable, taking nothing with him. He had refused to carry the book out. "It has chosen its witness," he had said before stepping out into the rain. The door closed. Behind him, like a seal. Since then, Lena had remained frozen in place, waiting for the next movement, the next whisper, the next shift in the atmosphere that would signal it was not over. The Bible had not moved since then. But the apartment was no longer the same. The lights dimmed and brightened on their own, regardless of switches or time of day. The air no longer carried warmth. Every breath felt as though it had passed through stone. The clocks ticked in irregular rhythms, occasionally stopping altogether, only to catch up minutes later in a quiet, frantic burst. Shadows fell where they shouldn't. Reflections appeared a fraction behind real time. It was as though the laws of space had begun to dissolve around the book. At precisely 3:12 a.m., the silence broke. It was the sound of paper shifting, just once. A slow, deliberate flutter, like a hand had turned a page in the stillness. Lena's breath caught in her throat, her eyes fixed on the Bible. The cover hadn't moved, but the edges of the pages were no longer aligned. One had lifted ever so, slightly. Her pulse quickened. She stood and approached it slowly, each step sounding louder than it should. When she reached the table, she hesitated, then opened the cover. The pages were different, not blank, not this time, not scripture either. What filled the pages now were sentences, dozens of them. Some she recognized immediately, phrases she had thought in private, never spoken aloud, regrets, memories, sins, conversations she hadn't had in years. Others were unfamiliar, but felt intimate, like entries in a diary written by a part of her she had forgotten. She flipped forward. The sentences grew more erratic, overlapping slightly, written in the margins, then bleeding into the main text. Some were in her handwriting. Some weren't. Some appeared to have been scratched in with something sharp, the paper torn slightly where pressure had been too strong. Names appeared, her father's, her childhood friend, her confessor. Some were crossed out violently. Some were circled. She turned more pages. Faster. Her own name repeated again and again, followed by fragments of thoughts that made her stomach twist. She saw lines she hadn't yet thought, phrases that felt predictive, not reflective, descriptions of things she hadn't done, but feared she might. The book wasn't just recording her, it was scripting her. A new page turned itself. Her hands hadn't moved. It flipped slowly, as if performed with care. The next spread was blank. But, as she stared, ink began to bleed up from beneath the surface. Slowly at first, then with urgency. Words formed in real time, shaping themselves into a sentence she couldn't look away from. The reader becomes the written. Below it, her own name again. Then, you will remember this differently. Lena stumbled back. Her chair scraped loudly across the floor. The book remained open. The room seemed to tilt slightly, as if space had become uneven, or the floor itself had shifted beneath her. She turned to run, but the doorknob felt hot to the touch. The hallway beyond was darker than it should have been. When she turned back, to the table, the Bible had closed, but on its cover, etched now where there had been only gold filigree, was the outline of a single open eye, and below it, carved faintly into the leather. "We are not finished." By the time dawn arrived, Lena's apartment no longer felt like her own. Light came through the windows in streaks, but it didn't touch anything. It just hovered. The air inside was dense, not with heat or dust, but with presence, like a room recently exited by someone who'd been sitting too close. The book had not moved from the table, but she no longer questioned its stillness. Movement was not how it worked. It shifted in other ways, in meaning, in memory, in control. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were raw from crying, but no tears came, anymore. Her hands trembled from exhaustion, but she didn't feel tired. Her thoughts, once her own, now echoed in ways that felt monitored, fed through a filter she could not see. The Bible remained shut, but she knew it was still writing. Somewhere inside those pages, sentences were forming, some about her, others about what would happen next. And she feared that whatever had been inked last, it would not end with her name. Father Pavel returned just after sunrise. This time he knocked only once and entered without waiting. He carried a small iron box under one arm and a tightly wrapped bundle of cloth under the other. His expression had hardened, but his eyes flickered with something close to regret. He said nothing at first. He merely approached the Bible, stared at it for a long moment, and then gently laid the cloth bundle down. From within it, he drew out matches, salt, a crucifix bound in red twine, and finally a sealed flask of anointing, oil. The plan was simple: contain, cleanse, burn. They moved to the open space near the kitchen. Lena cleared a metal baking tray and set it on the tiled floor. Pavel placed the book onto it with a cautious reverence, then sprinkled it with salt. He drew a cross in oil on the cover, then lit the match. For a second, nothing happened. Then the flame caught, small, bright, licking at the pages. Lena felt her breath seize. The fire rose, crackled, danced, but the book did not burn. The pages blackened at the corners, curled slightly but didn't fall apart. The leather smoked, but no smell filled the room. The gold markings shimmered, not with melting, but with defiance. Pavel added more matches, more oil, whispered prayers, louder now, more urgent. The flames surged, but not upward. They bent sideways, flickering toward the floor like something pulling them down. Then the tray began to shake. Not violently, just enough to rattle. The salt rolled across the metal. The crucifix fell forward. The fire flared once, then vanished. Not extinguished, swallowed. The Bible lay open now, even though neither of them had touched it. The pages were blackened, but legible. A single line stretched across the center. What belongs to fire must first pass through ash, and below, it, in handwriting unmistakably Lena's. Not yet. You still have more to see. Pavel stepped back. He was pale, his breathing sharp. He tried again, pouring oil directly into the spine, lighting it a second time. The flame hissed, sparked, and vanished again, leaving not even heat behind. Lena knew then that it would not allow destruction. Not by flame, not by salt, not by prayer. Whatever this book was, it existed outside their means of control. It was not written to be undone. It was written to endure. They wrapped it again, this time in linen soaked with holy water, layered inside the iron box Pavel had brought. He sealed it shut with melted wax and nails. But even then the box trembled faintly in his arms. He told Lena they would take it to a monastery outside. The city, an old order, one that specialized in sealing what should not exist. He did not promise resolution, only containment. As they left, Lena paused at the threshold of her apartment. The walls were silent again, but not empty. The shadows were still slightly too dark. Her reflection in the hallway mirror still moved, followed a second behind. She knew it wasn't over, and as Pavel carried the box down the steps, she whispered something without meaning to. A line that had not been spoken but written, somewhere deep inside that Bible. What is sealed can be read from within.